You used illegal hazardous materials. You deliberately chose products that would be permanent. Nothing about this was improvement. It was sabotage. Janet checked her tablet. Actually, Mr. Wooten, painting a Victorian home in a historical district this color without approval decreases its value significantly. I pulled up comparable sales earlier. Similar homes in original condition sell for around $400,000. I showed Lyle the listings on my phone. Your blue paint job? Based on remediation costs and lost historical value, you've decreased this property's worth by at least $50,000. And that's before we factor in the lead contamination. Lyle sat back down. His hands were shaking. $50,000? Plus EPA fines? Plus remediation costs? Janet nodded. Plus my legal fees for handling this situation. Plus lost rental income while the property is uninhabitable. Plus code enforcement penalties. She started adding numbers on her tablet calculator. You're looking at well over $200,000 in damages, Mr. Wooten. Possibly much more depending on how long the EPA fines accumulate. Lyle put his head in his hands again. Frank told me this would work. Frank said squatters' rights were real. Frank said I could claim the house. I sat down on the porch railing. Frank doesn't have a law degree, does he? Lyle shook his head. Frank works at the tire shop, but he reads a lot online. He knows stuff. Janet closed her tablet. Mr. Wooten, reading articles online doesn't make someone a legal expert. Adverse possession is real, but it has very specific requirements that you never came close to meeting. You paid rent every single month. You had a signed lease. You were never in hostile possession. You were just a tenant with delusions. The neighbors were still watching from their yards. I looked at Lyle sitting on the porch steps with his head in his hands. Mrs. Hendricks walked over to her property line and called out to me. I've got something you need to see. She went inside and came back with a folder. These are copies of statements I made for code enforcement. She handed me the papers. I watched Lyle tell that entire paint crew he was claiming this house through squatters' rights. He was so proud of himself. 3 of the crew members gave me their phone numbers because they felt bad about what he was doing. I thanked her and added the statements to my growing file of evidence. Janet was already on her phone. I'm calling remediation companies right now. She spoke with someone for several minutes, asked about lead paint protocols, and wrote down numbers. The first estimate she got was $95,000 for complete hazmat removal and disposal. She showed me the quote on her phone. Lyle looked up when he heard the number. $95,000 for paint removal? Janet nodded. Lead paint requires specialized contractors with EPA certification, full hazmat suits, special disposal procedures, air quality monitoring. This isn't something you can just paint over or sand off yourself. She pulled up more regulations. If you try to remove it without proper certification, that's additional federal violations. Lyle stood up and started pacing again. I don't have $95,000. I barely had the $8,000 for the paint job. I looked at him directly. You should have thought about that before you deliberately used lead-based primer to save money. Tom's documentation shows you specifically asked for permanent bonding paint. You wanted this to be impossible to remove. Now you're paying for professional removal. Janet added the remediation costs to her tablet. With EPA fines, code violations, and now remediation, you're over $200,000 in damages. And that's before we calculate lost rental income while the property is uninhabitable. Lyle pulled out his phone and started texting someone. Probably Frank, Janet noticed. Calling your bar buddy won't help. The evidence is documented. The violations are federal. The fines accumulate daily. She looked at her watch. You've been in violation for 3 days now. That's $111,000 in EPA fines alone. The next morning, Lyle stopped by the property manager's office. Janet called me immediately. He just tried to stop paying rent. Said he's not paying another cent until this gets resolved. I asked what she told him. That